When we get to the end of Act Three, all of the ties that used to join the four lovers together have been severed. The friendships, the romantic ties, the ties to their families have all been separated. They're at each other's throats. That the potential for violence is very real. They might actually harm each other. And Oberon makes the wise decision to get them separated from each other. He has Puck go through the woods, and Puck is like a ventriloquist. He's disguising his voice like the lovers, and he's getting them all to walk around in these circles until they eventually fall asleep by themselves. In some ways, just that image of the lovers being asleep separately and going through the woods confused and alone and lost is really indicative of what happens in this part of comedy. They have lost everything. They don't know who they are. They're utterly alone. They're at a time when they need to be reborn, and of course that's exactly what's going to happen. We find out, and not quite as directly, but we do find out in the play that the same kinds of things have been happening with the other couples as well. In fact, about the only character who's having any kind of enjoyment in this part of the play is our friend Bottom, who's just having the greatest time of his life. Right? I mean, he's uh, Titania has all of these magic powers. She has all of these servants who are bringing him anything that he wants. He's being spoiled for the first time in his life, and he's just having an absolutely marvelous time. Even though he's got an ass's head fixed to himself, he's having the best days of his life. Curiously, we'll find out and we'll look at this passage. Of all the characters, he's the one who doesn't seem to really learn anything. He doesn't change. Part of that is going to be because maybe we don't learn as much from good experiences, but we have to learn through loss. That may be part of it. I think it is. But there's another part as well, and it has to do with that idea of imagination that we're going to have to come back to. Okay, let's go to the beginning of Act Four. And this is where we're really going to see things start to change. I'm looking over at my book and trying to do all of this. Oberon is going to speak to Puck, and we'll find out that he and Titania now are reconciled. And I want you to listen to a passage here, and I think you'll be able to see what becomes really important. And this is going to be Act 4, Scene 1, right around line 38. Her dotage now I do begin to pity, for meeting her in the late behind the wood, seeking sweet favors for this hateful fool, I did upbraid her and fall out with her. For she his hairy temples then had rounded with a cornet of fresh and fragrant flowers, and that some dew which sometime on the bud was wont to swell like round and orient pearls, stood now within the pretty floweret's eyes like tears that did their own disgrace bewail. Okay, we find out a couple of things in that passage. One, of course, he's describing how she has dressed up Bottom with all the flowers, and we can get the visual of how silly that would look, but also the effect that that might have on Oberon as he's watching it. Um, it's really though at the beginning that we get what I think is a key passage here. Her dotage now I do begin to pity. And he tells us that he had an argument with her, right? They had another falling out and arguing about the child, but she, in her having been bound to this love to Bottom, she gave up the child and gave up the child willingly, and now he begins to pity her. Do you notice that this practical joke has backfired in an absolutely spectacular way? Instead of him getting power over her and being able to laugh at her, he begins to have a real connection with her. They reconcile. To feel pity for someone is to put yourself into that person's position, to see the world as they would see it, and to have your emotional life connect with their emotional life. In pitying her, he's moving towards a reconciliation. And I think we could say, and certainly within the context of the play, that we could say that pitying, being able to see, understand her feelings, and have a sympathetic reaction to them, requires an act of imagination. something that he seemed to be lacking before. Let's look at the other lovers and see how this might come into play. Now, Theseus, uh, he hasn't learned his lesson yet. And when we meet him now, Theseus and Hippolyta and the others from the court, they've all gone into the woods to try to find these young kids who have run away, and they're going to start the search mission. And Theseus sounds a lot like a jerk right in the beginning. I sometimes will ask my classes when we're meeting in person if a young man is taking a young woman that he wants to impress hunting, what's he trying to do? And we'll talk about this for a while. And usually, he's trying to show off and show, how cool he is and the stuff that he knows, and you know, he's he's trying to claim that space to show off his masculinity. I want you to keep that idea in mind, and I want you to listen to just the tone of Theseus's language. Watch how he's using the imperative. He's giving a lot of commands. He, those commands are going out to the people that have to obey him. But the real audience for them, I want to suggest, is Hippolyta. This is him trying to show off that he is the man in charge. Go, one of you, find out the forester, for now our observation is performed. And since we have the wayward of the day, my love shall hear the music of my hounds. Uncouple in the western sky, with western valley, let them go. Dispatch, I say, and find the forester. We will, fair queen, up to the mountain's top and mark the musical confusion of hounds and echo in conjunction. Oh, he sounds very, very confident, doesn't he? The way that he's and the hounds we can see, they're good hunting dogs and they become, signs of his masculinity as well. Now then I'll ask my class, what is like the worst thing that can happen to that poor fellow at that time when he takes the young woman that he wants to impress out hunting with him? And we'll go through a couple of machinations. And since I want to keep these videos short, I'll cut to the quick. Usually the class will decide about the worst thing that can happen is if she says, yeah, that was a pretty good shot, but my old boyfriend, that's what you don't want to hear. That's humbling. Now listen to what Hippolyta is going to say, and remember that Theseus comes from Athens. He understands the city. She's actually much more in tune with the natural world than he is, and actually much more in tune with the supernatural. Listen to her. I was with Hercules and Cadmus once, when in the wood of Crete they bayed the bear, with hounds of Sparta. Never did I hear such gallant chiding, for besides the groves, the skies, the fountains, every region near seemed all one mutual cry. I never heard so musical a discord, such sweet thunder. It's one thing, fellas, to be compared to an old boyfriend. Hercules, compared to an old god friend, and Cadmus, the founder of Thebes. Uh, this is not the way that Theseus wants this to go. And in fact, in his next lines, we can hear that he's really humbled. My hounds are bred out of the Spartan kind. He's trying to recover here, but it's just not going to work. Now, what I want to suggest is that this scene where he starts off so full of himself and so he's ready to impress her, and then he becomes humbled, is actually very important. He has things that he has to learn from her. He can't do that till he starts to set aside his ego a little bit. She has things that she needs to learn from him, and I think she has to see him as being a little bit more human than he comes off as. In the same way that I suspect that Hermia and Helena each need to have the experience of living life as the other does. Either both have, by the time this is all over, both get to be the girl that everyone loves and the girl that no one loves. And they have to have that to really understand each other and to really value the relationships that they're able to maintain. And Oberon recognizes that. And I think that's why he doesn't have these young kids. Uh, he doesn't have them forget the experiences that they have. And he also doesn't have them remember what they've gone through exactly. That might be too painful. There's been too many recriminations and uh, too many hurt feelings. But instead, he has them remember their experiences as if they were a dream. Now they have the odd experience of they all wake up having had the same dream. Something's not quite right. There's something magical going on in the woods. But dreams occupy an interesting space. They're not real experiences, so we wouldn't rationally dislike someone for what they did to us in a dream. But they also give us occasions to reflect. And in fact, one of the first things that we do if we have a really strange dream or one of those dreams that just kind of haunts us through the day is we try to figure out, where did that come from? What did it mean? Uh, what's it trying to tell me? What's my mind trying to bring to my attention? And we interpret them. To interpret them, we use our imaginations. These young lovers get the experience of having experienced loss, having experienced pain. They understand that, and through their imaginations, they can make that into something that will help them grow up. Now, uh, listen to Bottom. These are some of my favorite lines in the play. And if we had a lot of time, we could talk about some of the philosophical backgrounds that inform his mixing up of all the senses and the confusion. There's some parody going on here, but we're not going to focus on that. I just want you to listen to what he's saying and particularly pay attention to what he's going to do with his dream. Now I'm on Act 4, Scene 1, right at the very end, around line 190, and it's a large prose paragraph that we'll look at. When my cue comes, call me and I will answer. My next is most fair Pyramus. Hi ho, Peter Quince, flout the bellows mender, snout the tinker starveling. God's my life stolen hence and left me asleep. I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Methought I was, there's no man can tell what. Methought I was, and methought I had, but man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom. And I will sing it at the latter end of the play before the Duke, peradventure to make it the more gracious. I shall sing it at her death. So Bottom, we find out, wants to incorporate the dream that he's had into the play that they're writing, which could only really make the play more horrible than it would otherwise be. But notice what he says. I will call it Bottom's Dream because it has no bottom. There's no end to what it means. And he doesn't do the hard work that the other lovers are tasked with. He doesn't have to interpret. He doesn't have to use his imagination to figure out what he meant. In fact, he's going to get somebody else, Peter Quince, to write the ballad of the dream. He'll do the interpretation. Bottom stays, and I think we want him to stay the way that he is because he's lovable and he's wonderful and he's funny. He doesn't grow. The other characters in the play really do. He doesn't. And part of that may be because he doesn't experience the kind of hardship and loss that the other characters do, those things that are necessary for growth within comedy, but also because he's not willing to do that hard work of using the imagination to fix things. A little while later, Theseus, when he's trying to explain how theater works to Hippolyta, who doesn't really understand it at all, it just seems silly to her. He will say that plays are no worse if the imagination mend them. And notice how we now get, as your generation would say, a kind of meta quality, right? We're watching players watch a play on the stage just as we are watching a play. We have to use our imaginations to mend what we're seeing, and Theseus will use his imagination, the others, to mend what they're seeing. In some way, that idea of using imagination to mend becomes analogous to what we do with our experiences, what we do with our lives. Notice, for example, in this play within the play, the basic plot summary of it is, well, it's a lot like Romeo and Juliet, uh, and it's also a lot like the beginning of this play. There's a young couple that's in love with each other, and there are parents that are blocking them. The production that the Rude Mechanicals put on is one without any imagination. Remember, they're concerned if there's a scene in the moonlight, well, they have to check the almanac to make sure there's going to be moonlight that night. They're going to have, if there's not, there's going to have to be a character playing the moon. They're worried if some character comes on disguised as a lion that the audience won't get it, so they're going to have somebody say, "Oh, it's not really a lion. Don't be afraid. It's just me dressed up as a lion." There's no imagination. There's no understanding of how art works. There's no interpretation. It's a literal story, and of course, it ends in a kind of absurd tragedy, like Romeo and Juliet, where none of the bad things would happen if one letter was delivered, a letter incidentally that couldn't be delivered because there was a plague and there was a quarantine and the mail couldn't get through. It sounds kind of familiar to our time, right? But if one letter had been able to get through, then all of the other pieces might have fallen together. There are a lot of other mistakes that were made, but Romeo and Juliet is really, in many ways, an absurd story, even more than it's a tragedy. It's just sad and hopeless in so many ways. That's Pyramus and Thisbe. Uh, that same narrative with imagination, as it's uh, put together by the characters who are able to learn from their experiences, becomes a brilliant comedy. And those are the ideas that I want us to talk about when we meet in our discussion board. Think about reconciliation. Think about how the imagination fixes things and allows the characters to grow. And also, I want you to look at that uh, the last two things that we hear from Puck. One is the song that he sings when he's guarding the door when the lovers finally get to retire for their on, on their wedding night. And notice all the imagery within that song is an imagery of death. I want you to tell me why it's an imagery of death. And then want you to tell me how we're going to make sense of the very ending where Puck comes on stage and addresses the audience directly. Okay, that'll be our story for discussion board. Uh, Everybody stay safe and healthy. I'll see you tomorrow.